A little bit of an intro. I spent the last 13 years at Unilever in a variety of different roles, but in the last 7 years I've been a marketing director at Unilever, where I was responsible for Unilever's new businesses unit as a director in that team, and then later on responsible for initiating and then leading the Unilever Foundry, which was Unilever's global platform to connect and engage with the startup ecosystem. And during that, those years, I got a huge amount of experience around how do corporates and startups come together to pioneer the future. And I wanted to share some of that with you today. But before we get into that, I want to start with a question. What does the future of your organization look like? If you're looking ahead 20 years, will your organization even exist? Will it be here? I mean, or will you be a subject of disruption and have your own Kodak moment? Are you anticipating that the next 20 years will be similar to the last, or are you expecting some sort of big-scale disruption? When it comes to looking more broadly at your industry, what does disruption look like? Is it being driven by you, by startups, by a range of different people? And how are you engaging with that area of disruption? Because I think as big corporates, there's never been a more important time to ask that question, because the reality is that all of the barriers to entry are coming down. When I first started at Unilever 13 years ago, Unilever was built, or like any big company, on economies of scale. We had economies of scale through our manufacturing and the factories that we built. Unilever had economies of scale through media and would be able to get massive discounts on media through big media spends. And we had economies of scale through the retailers that we engaged with, where you had high stock rotations that meant you got prime shelf positioning. But today, as a startup, I can get contract manufacturers to manufacture my own products. I can buy an ad on Google or Facebook for the same price as a company like Unilever, and I can distribute my products through Amazon or eBay or Etsy at with a similar distribution reach to a Unilever or Procter & Gamble. And so what we're seeing is this, the rise of the startup ecosystem, if you like. And as big companies, we're facing competition from three areas. Firstly, we're facing competition from an investment perspective. Last year, startups received $127 billion in venture investment. That's investment that's going into pioneering the future of your industry, to disrupting your business. And if you compare that to your corporate R&D spend, you can start to see that actually the future of your industry, the future of your business, is being developed outside of your business because of this investment. But startups aren't just competing for investment, they're also competing for talent. And this is a slide from India looking at the competition for talent. Unilever, for many years, or Hindustan Unilever, has been the employer of choice when it comes to graduates wanting a job after graduation. And that's been the case for many years, except in 2015, we started to see that change. And who was the number one company to work for, or the number one organization type to work for in 2015 and still today? Well, that answer is startups. We're seeing startups as the biggest competition for graduate talent coming out of universities. So startups are competing on investment, they're competing on talent, but they're also competing on growth. This is a chart from the US where it looks at the growth of the non-alcoholic beverages category in the US. And if you see the line along the bottom, that's companies that were registered more than 10 years ago, so CocaCola, PepsiCo, for instance. And they're struggling to grow. And this is representative of most industries. I mean, most large corporates are really struggling to get 1 or 2% growth year on year. But the beverage category is still growing really nicely. In fact, it's growing exceptionally well. And it's being driven by companies that were registered in the last 10 years. These are startups, artisan producers, smaller players that are killing, if you like, or stagnating the growth of PepsiCo and CocaCola via death by 1,000 cuts. As one example of that, here's a beverage company, Aquahydrate, that has Mark Wahlberg as one of its founders and investors. It launched in 2011. They've got projected revenue this year of 25 million, outlets of 30,000 across the US. It's growing nicely. In fact, it's growing really well. The water is pH positive, so it neutralizes the acid that we often intake. But even at 25 million, it's barely even reading on Coca-Cola's market share reads. I mean, it doesn't even really register. And then the multiples that they would be looking to exit for are quite high. But it still has its own challenges. I mean, 25 million is good growth, but to go from 0 to 25 million is much different from going from 25 million to several hundred million. And so the challenge for them is, well, how do we scale this? How do we get to like something that genuinely competes at a CocaCola or PepsiCo level? This is not just a beverage category or a consumer goods category issue. This is right across the board. In fact, if you can see this, we've got energy, which has traditionally been formed on like high capital investment. Again, seeing a huge amount of disruption from companies that are registered in the last 10 years. When it comes to pharma, again, quite regulated and also big investment. Startups are getting a smaller amount of that growth, but nonetheless, still the lion's share. Telco, beauty industries, I've talked about beverages already. Startups are driving the growth of basically every industry in our world. So if your big business exists based on a heritage of economies of scale, and you've got this environment where you've got startups that are basically cannibalizing your growth and becoming the future of your category, then back to the original question, what does the future of your organization look like? Will it be relevant? Or are startups sort of going to slowly grow up and take over, and your firm might continue at 1 or 2 or 5% growth, but you won't see the explosive growth that you might have enjoyed or that startups are enjoying today? And to answer that question, I thought it's worth having a look back to Hollywood. Hollywood in the 1940s was vertically integrated. They owned and operated everything. So they owned actors, actresses, lighting crews, were all on the books of Hollywood Inc. And then what happened in the 1940s? Two things. They had antitrust legislation came in and sort of forced a breakup of the big studio structure. And they had TV that came in and it changed the way that production had to happen. And so what happened then is you started to see a whole bunch of smaller firms, if you like, launch. And these firms were pulled together for any one given project. So you wanted to create a movie? Okay, let's bring in the best lighting crew. Let's bring in the best cast. Let's bring in the best props. Let's bring in the best animation capabilities. And we'll form a project that effectively develops that movie. And today you see that with 15 pages of credits at the end, or 30 pages if you're watching a Bollywood movie. This is happening in an organizational context. I mean, this example is often used in freelancers, like the future of your organization is not an organization of people, it's about having freelancers bring in people. But I think we have to take that a step further and think about these nodes as not just individuals, but also partners. An example of this is Lego. So in 2000, Lego almost went broke. In 2004, they had a new CEO come on board. And in his valedictory interview in December last year, the CEO that really took Lego from almost bankrupt to, in February this year, being recognized as the most valuable brand by Brand Finance. He said, "We were humble enough to realize that we couldn't do everything." And for me, that is like the core of what lies at this organization of the future. And so in 2004, what he effectively did is he took Lego as an organization and he started to open it up. He instead of doing Legoland and owning Legoland, they partnered with Merlin Entertainment to deliver a Lego theme parks and really scale that up. And with Merlin Entertainment on board, Legoland is going from a few offerings to now 25 different theme parks in the future that will open up, providing over 10 million, they've got traffic with 10 million people coming in and having an immersive experience of the Lego brand each and every year. Lego had fantastic TV and TV opportunities, and they partnered with Warner Brothers to create Lego Movie, which you might have seen. Who's seen the Lego Movie? Come on, yeah. I've got kids, but I think I dragged them along to see it. I love it. Netted $500 million in year one, and they partnered with Warner Brothers to do that. Again, bringing revenue back to Lego, bringing brand experience to the Lego brand, creating a quality asset that could continue to create Lego experiences for consumers for many years. They did this, time and time again. They've done game consoles with TT Games. They do fashion with an apparel company as well. Basically, they've realized that if they want to be a brand that is incredibly valuable and incredibly experiential, then they have to be partnering with people to do that. And it comes back to this question. Like, if you want to build a brand like this as marketers, if you want to be thinking about how you disrupt the future, it comes back to this question, like, what's your dot? What's the thing that's at the core of your organization that other people can build off? What's the thing that makes your brand or your business so attractive that other people might want to actually get on board and start to be part of that and build off that? To help us with that, I've got a few examples here. So I think it's interesting to think back, wind the clock back 9 years. You had Accor Hotels, which is by far one of the biggest hotel groups in the world. And then you had Airbnb, which was this small, unknown startup in Silicon Valley that had an interesting idea. No one knew about them. They had a brand that looked like a penis or a vagina, depending on how you interpret it. And they had very low engagement, effectively. And I think what would have been interesting at that point in time is for Accor and Airbnb to get in a room and say to each other, look, you've got interesting capability as Airbnb, and Accor has some amazing brands. Why don't we look at how we bring these two things together? We'll bring the scale of our brand to bring dramatic scale to Airbnb, and we'll bring our brands to help scale your capability. That discussion obviously never happened. But it's an interesting idea to think back, like, how history could have been different if it had of. Or if you're CocaCola. Now, not the Coca-Cola company, but say if you're one of the local bottlers. Now, the local bottlers don't actually own any of the brands, but they do have some interesting capabilities. They've got manufacturing capabilities, they've got distribution capabilities, and they can also bring marketing capabilities to help grow and scale their brand. Now, if Coca-Cola bottlers talked to Aquahydrate and said to them, is there an opportunity for us to be working together? Can we take your brand, put it through our manufacturing and distribution capabilities and help to scale it? I think that would be a really interesting conversation. What's interesting is Diet Coke, for example, took 18 years to get from launch to peak consumption. And obviously, it's starting to stagnate now. Coconut water, in the UK at least, looks like it's reached peak consumption after about 2.5 years. So the key question to corporates with such a high churn rate on new trends and emerging trends is, do you actually want to own all of these brands? Do you want to, because obviously you wanted to own Diet Coke because it's now massive, but coconut water, if it's going to peak after 2.5 years, like maybe you don't even want to own that. And so what we're starting to see is this opportunity for partnership. Let me bring one of these to life that I had the opportunity to work on while I was at Unilever. Signal. Signal is the biggest oral care brand in France and in many countries around the world, actually. Now, they sell toothbrushes and toothpaste. Pretty standard. There's nothing too exciting about it. There's no electric toothbrushes or anything like that. But there was this company called Playbrush. And what Playbrush do is they put a dongle on the bottom of a manual toothbrush. It's not actually that big. And it tracks where you're brushing in your mouth. And what that does is it links via Bluetooth into an app, and then it gamifies the whole brushing experience. So it can track where you're brushing, so then you chase away monsters in your mouth. And I've got a 3-year-old, and every night we have to headlock him to get him to brush his teeth. And it is a nightmare. With Playbrush, he does a full 2-minute brush around the whole of his mouth, and then he wants to do it again. And we're like, Max, come on, time to go to bed. So Playbrush has transformed my child's oral care, but it's also transformed the Signal brand. We went from introduction to in-market in a very short period of time with a pilot across the whole of France, bringing huge scale to Playbrush and bringing innovation to Signal and also revenues to Signal. Another example, it's reasonably straightforward when it comes to products, but Omo, the biggest laundry brand in Brazil. Now, Omo, for many years, has sold powder and liquid in a bottle or a box, and that's basically the Omo laundry detergent business. But we're starting to see the emergence of different business models around this. So you can have your laundry, and this is probably quite familiar to many of you already, but you can have your laundry picked up, cleaned, and dropped back to you. And for most people, this is an opportunity that has never existed or is an incredible luxury because of the price. What Unilever is doing in Brazil is they've partnered with a company called Alavedera, who does the whole service model of laundry. So they pick up your laundry, have it cleaned, and drop it back to you. The discussion there was an interesting one. It was, you've got some interesting capability, we've got a fantastic brand. How can Unilever bring that brand to help scale that startup and bring innovation back to the corporate? Again, these models are not necessarily about ownership or equity, it's about access. And so what you can start to see is, for a brand like Omo, it starts to grow through having its core business, which continues to exist, but then looking at how you start to bring in, services for laundry, or Spotify for clothes, or a whole bunch of other business models that could potentially take place around the Omo brand. And so what we're doing here, this corporate startup collaboration, is not just like great PR or a bit of interesting tech or something to bring excitement to the company. What we're actually doing is we're building the organizations of the future. An organization that is far more agile, far more innovative, far more responsive to the needs of consumers. But it starts with this question of what's your dot? Because what we're doing here is, I think we're going into a new era of growth. In the past, we've looked a lot at organic growth. How can we grow our business from within, with the brands that we have, with the capabilities that we have? And that's resulted in this stagnant, 1 to 5% growth year on year. But it fails to capitalize on what's happening outside of our corporates. And so then you go into this period of acquired growth, where we start to acquire these businesses, like Unilever's acquisition of Dollar Shave Club, for instance. But again, that's an expensive strategy. I mean, the multiples that these companies are demanding are incredible, and it's hard to justify that back to shareholders. And so the opportunity that we have here is an opportunity to enter a whole new growth era, a growth era which is formed on partnerships, a growth era which is not about ownership, it's about access, a growth era which we call leverage growth. And the great thing about leverage growth is it turns everything on its head. When I was responsible for new business creation at Unilever, or looking at disruption at Unilever, like most innovation officers, the brief back to the board is, okay, if we want to bring about disruption, it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to cost a lot of money, it's going to be incredibly high risk. But today, with leveraged growth, you can do this. It can be transformational, like Unilever Laundry going into services, but it can be fast, from a first meeting to an in-market pilot in less than 12 months probably. It can be leading edge, like connected toothbrush, for example, but it's incredibly low risk because you're working with an existing startup. It can be high impact. We can take Playbrush and scale it across the whole of France or other countries quite quickly. But it's incredibly low investment because we're not doing that upfront investment that the startup has already put in for the last 5 years. So I think as you think about your brands, as you think about disruption, think about what's going on outside of your four walls. This is not about what you need to do or what you need to build or what you need to buy, but it's about how you can create that organization and culture that allows you to look at how you can partner with what's going on the outside.